My dogs. You can hear that?
Mm-hmm. Just go on mute.
You can hear that?
All right. Well, here we are. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Descendants of Jesuit Enslavement uh, informational session. And you will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end. I'm Karen Royal, former executive director of the GU 272 Descendants Association. Joining us tonight, we have Sandra Green Thomas, former president of the GU 272 Descendants Association, and Harris Ware West. Uh, Sandra, you could correct me on your all of your family names. We also have Julia Battle, who's also a Harris Ware descendant. Shonda and Rhonda, Shonda Norton, Rhonda Thompson, who are Golf descendants. Uh, Nagas Rucker, who is a Mahoney descendant, and Curtis Harris, who is a Harris Ware descendant. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's joining us on YouTube for the for this information session. And I'll just share just a little bit about the lineup for tonight, just so that everyone is clear about what we will be discussing. And let me get us out of the way. Um, uh, I'll just give a brief description of the history of the sale. We'll talk about what the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation is and is not, as well as the relationship between the GU 272 Descendants Association, as we understood it as former board members, and the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. Um, and then Sandra's going to talk about the former founding and former GU 272 Descendants Board member statement, as well as a letter sent to Father Kosecki and his response. We will have Nagas talk about Maryland Jesuit enslavement and beyond. Rhonda Thompson will talk about reparations versus reconciliation. Julia will talk about our concerns. Curtis will talk about what can we do. Shonda will also talk about research. And then Julia will come back and talk about a sample letter. We will then go into our question and answer session. Please save all of your questions until that part is announced. And then the format for your questions, I'll put this in the chat from time to time. Put the Q and colon. And if your question is being addressed to a specific person, put that person's name and then ask your question. Again, I just want to thank everybody for being present, and I'll get started. Um, a brief history of what we have come to know of the 1838 sale. And to be clear, the 1838 sale is not the be all and end all of Jesuit enslavement. But many of us came into this knowledge because of the sale. It was announced in, I think it was April of 2016 by the New York Times. There was an article, and that's when most of us became aware of it. But prior to that New York Times article in the spring of 2016, students at Georgetown began to protest because they had learned that 2 buildings on campus were named for the priest who sold what we thought of was 272 people at the time. It ended up being 314 people. But students were protesting that these buildings were named for men who had sold people to Louisiana. Those people were my husband's ancestors and the ancestors of everybody here. Not everyone came to Louisiana. So we found out about this in the spring, and we decided we wanted to come together. And Sandra, myself, and many other descendants, we gathered together in the summer of 2016 to form the GU 272 Descendants Association. We have now learned that there's so much more to this whole story than just the 1838 sale. And we'll learn a little bit more about that tonight. And the next thing I want to talk about is the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation as it relates to the GU 272 Descendants Association. When we all gathered for the first time on August 14, 2016, Joe Stewart brought to us at that time a document that talked about the idea of a foundation. And some of us, most of us agreed with that. Not everyone agreed with that. We made some changes to that document. And at that time, that document included support for descendants, direct payments to descendants. It also included genealogy support. That is not what the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation looks like today. And at some point that got changed, and we never knew anything about that getting changed. 272 Descendants Association is a totally separate organization. It's a 501c7 organization. And the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The two are totally separate organizations, except that some of the board members from the GU 272 Descendants Association are also on the board of the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. It is still unclear how 2 separate organizations can have a relationship such that one would tell you that can promise you benefits from the other if you become a member. There's something unusual about that arrangement, but they're 2 separate organizations. What the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation is and is not. It is, and I'm going to share this on my screen for this part. The foundation is not reparations. And I know that a lot of times when someone hears that there's money on the table, $100 million being pledged, you might think that that means that, oh, we're going to get reparations. It's not reparations. In fact, if you go to descendants.org, and I'm going to just share that part of my screen, you will see very clearly what the foundation describes themselves as being. So I am at descendants.org, and under the section where they say what we do, and it says facilitating truth, racial healing, transformation, and reconciliation. The foundation will provide moral, intellectual, and financial support to individuals, organizations, and communities that are engaged in truth-seeking, racial healing, and transformation programs and activities that can lead to the internalizing the truth about slavery, dismantling remnants of the legacy of slavery in America, mitigating the destructive presence of racism, and achieving atonement and reconciliation that is badly needed by our nation and the world. It also supports the educational aspirations of descendants and supporting the elderly and the infirm. And it's to meet the emergency needs of impoverished elderly or infirm descendants of individuals enslaved by the Jesuits. And it's very important to look at what people put in writing versus what you think your perception of what they are going to do. You don't see anything in here about direct payments to descendants, although that was included when we first discussed this in 2016. And I just wanted to make that point very clear. And if you have any questions about this part of the presentation, just hold your questions aside. Later on, during our question and answer session, you'll be able to put your question in the chat, and I'll also repeat what the format should be for your question. But next, we're going to have Sandra Green Thomas come up and speak next. Sandra, you have to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. I'm here to basically just sort of give a recap on some of the things that were provided to you in the resource link. In particular, we have the statement that was signed by 6 former founding board members. In that statement, we declared that the foundation as it exists now was not discussed with us, and also the fact that there was no formal outreach or any outreach at all to speak of to other descendants or individuals or groups, and also the fact that there were major disagreements within the founding board membership. Karen, I have a different recollection than you. In 2016, when I was still involved, there was discussion of direct payments to descendants, but it was never agreed upon. Mr. Stewart always, and Sherilyn Branch always talked very dismissively of that notion and saying that reparations was something that denigrated the memory of their ancestors and that they would never be for that. Okay, and that was a major disagreement that we went back and forth on. Next, we have a letter that we sent to Father Kosicki, who is the head of the Jesuits for North America, requesting a meeting with him. Some of us had individually requested meetings with him over the last few years and had either been denied or ignored. We thought that once the truth came out about the nature of the foundation and its origins, which were in a lie because the Memorandum of Understanding has statements in it that are untrue, we thought that once again we would appeal to him for a meeting. And his response was basically no, that they decided to partner with the largest descendant organization in the United States, which is a false statement as well, because there were actually no members of that organization. But so, I mean, at the end of this, we can get into the weeds on it. You all can ask me questions about it, about the timeline, about what went on, about the letters and the statements that we have made in response to the foundation. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. And next we have Nages Rucker, and she's going to talk about enslavement, Jesuit enslavement in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Welcome, cousins. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the history of Jesuit slaveholding. The history of Jesuit slaveholding began in the 17th century. Evidence indicates that the Jesuits went from a small number of enslaved Africans in just a few decades to a vast network of plantations often referred to as missions, where enslaved persons of African descent toiled. Jesuit slaveholding in Maryland has often been discussed through the perspectives of the Jesuit priests and not the human beings they forcibly enslaved at risk of great physical harm or even death. These perspectives focus on a limited number of Jesuit missions, mostly located in current-day St. Mary's, Charles, Anne Arundel, and Prince George's County, Maryland. And though the 1838 sale of more than 300 people to Louisiana for the benefit of Georgetown University has more recently been scrutinized, there remains a need, particularly for descendants, to explore in greater detail the slaveholding activities of the Society of Jesus throughout the United States. For example, the Jesuits not only maintain missions on the western shore of Maryland, but also on its eastern shore, in present-day Talbot and Cecil counties, as well as Frederick, Harford, and Baltimore counties. Additionally, other early Jesuit missions were established in Delaware and in Pennsylvania. The establishment of Jesuit missions, as well as their sustainment, was solely placed upon the shoulders of our ancestors. Those enslaved by the Jesuits in the state of Maryland were moved at the direction of Jesuit superiors throughout the state of Maryland and beyond. And Jesuits from the English colonies provided enslaved persons for use by other Jesuits and other Catholic orders. Those enslaved by the Jesuits in Maryland were sent to Kaskaskia, Illinois to labor at a mission established by French Jesuits in the 1700s. Others were sent to Missouri to support the missions in St. Louis and Florissant, Missouri, and to Alabama, where their labor was used to establish today's Spring Hill College, one of the many Jesuit colleges established via the direct and indirect labor of enslaved persons of African descent. Genetic testing has also revealed DNA connections between descendants to Catholic families allied with the Jesuits, families such as the Hills, the Haydens, and Lancasters, who traveled from Maryland and Virginia with their enslaved and their families to establish Catholic enclaves in Kentucky, Missouri, and Indiana. And our ancestors also built schools, colleges, and churches at all of those locations. There is no definitive source for information on the full breadth of Jesuit slaveholding or on slaveholding within the broader Catholic community. So I highly encourage descendants to take a look at the resource list provided by our host of this evening's program, and to, if you're on Facebook, to join the Descendants of Jesuit Enslavement Facebook group for help in learning more about this critical part of our history. And now I'll turn it over to Rhonda, who's going to talk about reparations versus reconciliation.
Hello, thank you so much. So as I kind of thought about what I was going to say or what I was really going to talk about on this topic, and as I began researching, it really struck me that the word reparation was almost always used when there was some sort of discussion for atonement for past egregious civil atrocities against a society of people. The biggest example of such an atrocity, of course, would be the enslavement of African people in America. Of course, there are examples of reparations that have been paid for these kind of acts, such as the Jewish Holocaust, reparations to Native Americans for lands that were taken from them. And of course, currently, reparations of the German government making to the Namibian people for the genocide of their people. And that's just to name a few, unfortunately. Really the only conversations where that term reparations is completely absent is with the Society of Jesus. And this is, of course, conversations that I've heard about and not been a part of. they've decided to use the term reconciliation as sort of a mutually exclusive term to reparations, it seems. But is it really? So I think, to really think about that, we have to look at really what does each word mean, the definition. So according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of reconciliation is to restore to friendship or harmony, and to cause to submit to or accept something unpleasant. Whereas the definition of reparations is the act of making amends, offering expiation, or giving satisfaction for a wrong and injury or something done or given as amends or satisfaction. So listening to those two, I feel, well, you can make your own judgment of what would be most appropriate to atone for the act of Jesuit slaveholding. But there is clearly a lot missing with the Society of Jesus attempt at atonement. And maybe, just maybe, somebody should get them a dictionary. But of course, this conversation of reparations is a complex one. And it deserves just that, a conversation, and it should not be left out of this example, as it hasn't been of any of the other examples of any of the atrocities that we've seen. So mine is pretty short and sweet, but of course, I think that it probably draws the most thought and conversation to the difference between reconciling for something and repairing. So that's all I have. I think Julia is next.
Thank you, Rhonda. As you can see, there's been a lot of research and discussion on this topic. And from that research and discussion and concerns that folks have who are involved, there's a set of concerns that have been formulated by this group that we'd like to share with you. These are not mutually exclusive in any way, but these are just kind of a summary of things that are concerns that has grown out of this situation. So I'm going to share a visual with you, I'm hoping, if technology will cooperate. And so you can see the concerns, and I'm going to go ahead and read them just so they're out there and everybody can get an idea.
Technology is not cooperating.
It's gonna, we're getting there. We're getting there. Okay. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right, very good. And I think I can even slide it up and down. All right, so here are our concerns, and I'll go ahead and read them to you. Number one, the structure of the distribution of funds for the foundation is as follows. 50% to racial healing or reconciliation, 25% to a scholarship fund for education, 15% to the emergency care of the elderly, and 10% to administrative costs, payment of board members and employees for the foundation. Concern 2, there is an underlying fallacy in the initial agreement. The opening statement of the Memorandum of Understanding created in 2016, designed to state mutual expectations of the Jesuits and Descendants, reads, since April 16, 2016, more than 10,000 descendants of the 272 enslaved men, women, and children, living and deceased, have been identified, and the majority have since organized into a GU 272 Descendants Association. The falsehood perpetuated by this statement becomes evident when a review of the association records indicates that the majority of the descendants were never organized into a GU 272 Descendants Association. At the time of the memorandum's publication, less than 50 individuals were found to be on record as members. Concern 3. The impact on descendant representation in the foundation of this fallacy. Therefore, the 3 descendants appointed to the foundation board do not represent all or most of the descendants. Of greater concern is the lack of a transparent process by which the members of the foundation board are chosen. There is a concern about the nepotism employed to create the board. The self-appointed members of the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation Board are also the self-appointed leaders in the GU 272 Descendants Association. Indeed, the Jesuit order lacks a process to hear the voices of and negotiate with a broader, more diverse representation of the descendant community. Concern 4. The process of funding the foundation is questionable. The Jesuits are fundraising in order to finance the foundation. They are, in essence, asking others to pay for their sin of buying and selling the same human souls that they baptized into the Roman Catholic faith. The limited benefits that the Jesuits are offering to descendants can only be accessed by descendants if they agree to pay a membership fee to the GU 272 Descendants Association. In essence, we are being forced to pay for the proposed yet meager benefits which are our birthright. And finally, access to documentation. The Jesuits have turned over all of the documentation associated with the slavery and plantations to Georgetown University as a repository. There is a lack of funding to facilitate transcription and digitization of documents held within the archives. Of more importance is their prioritization of which documents are to be digitized first without descendants' input. Descendants' access to these records needed to verify ancestry and eligibility for benefits is controlled by the Jesuits as well. And I'm going to turn it over to Curtis Harris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I'm Curtis Harris. My father, Curtis Harris Sr., who's no longer with us, was one of 14 of his brothers and sisters who were born William Harris III. William Harris III was born in Louisiana in 1897 and died several years ago, at 97 years old. We think in our family, we have something like 64 grandkids from Granddaddy Williams and 158 grandkids. Maryland has always been his home, and it's been sort of our ancestral legacy. There are 2 things I want to urge you all to do. That's my task. The first task is to organize your family. As everyone before me has so eloquently stated, you need to understand your family tree. You have to have some understanding of your genealogy to understand how you fit within all of this. There's not any funding put in place to do that, but really, you have to have a lot of input in that anyway. So first of all, you've got to organize yourself, educate your family members with all the materials that are being provided, and have discussions. So let me touch base and go back to my family and this GU 272 legacy and how it impacts that process. When Sam Harris and Betsy Ware, who were both born in Maryland, who were part of the GU 272, and they were included in the sale purchase, there were several children born from that marriage. William Harris was one who was born in 1840 in Louisiana, and he married Keziah Harris. It's that offspring that gave birth to William Harris Jr. and then a subsequent William Harris III, my granddaddy I just spoke to you about. And so that's my branch of the Harris tree from GU 272 births in Louisiana. But there are a lot of other Harrises you've heard too that are from other branches of the Harrises as well. William also married a second time Chair Charity. So there's a branch attributable to that. So all of you have your similar type of stories to tell in all of this. And unless you clearly go back and do some type of genealogy and DNA testing, you'll never get to that point and understand it. And believe me, it's very educational. Some of your young kids and things like that, if you get them involved, it makes great talks for them to do term papers and things like that in school. So we know that even beyond my family's relationship through the Harris stream from William and Keziah, from DNA testing from some of our family members, we have a genealogist who certified that we're also related to the Bennett and Claire Scott, who are part of GU 272 purchase, and Nance and Vivian Butler. And I'm sure a lot of you will find the same things. So we're all in this together, and you've got to do that type of research to get us started on all of this and to get your family started and to get everybody excited. The second and last thing with it, have this discussion with your families when you're scheduling a family union or you're not having a family union, through Zoom calls or links. Just talk as much as you can. Let members assign tasks to do various things for you. And then you can help strategize how you want to use this information to make your appeal to the Jesuits and this newly formed association that we're talking about. And so that's all I have to say on that matter. And so now I'm going to give it back to Julia, because there's a sample letter that Julia is going to present. And our family, our stream of Paris, as the many streams of Paris as there are, we're going to have meetings, and we're going to talk about how to use that letter or something else to develop something special for us that we want to use as input to express our concerns to the Jesuits and to the association. Thank you, Julia. It's on you.
Thank you, Curtis. I think we have Shonda in between, though. Are you here? There's Shonda.
Yes,
Sorry,
All right.
Sandra.
no worries. Good evening, my name is Shonda, and as we've heard from Curtis, he's given us our call to action. So as we are organizing our families, there's one thing that we cannot stop doing, and that's continuing to research. You know, there are always more descendants to be found, and there's always more information to be learned about our ancestors. So as we're organizing our families, it's important to organize for some of us to start your research. And that includes, as Curtis stated, create a family tree or update your family tree. Sit down with elders and relatives and family members and cousins and whomever to learn your history, learn about your surnames, learn about other surnames, establish those relationships. Don't stop researching. Take advantage of the genealogy databases on the internet, like Ancestry or Family Search or the National Archives. Utilize the Library of Congress and even the census records. All of those are beneficial resources to help to continue research. Verify. You should not someone else's documentation or someone else's information for your family for research. It may not be the same as yours. They may not be looking for the same thing that you're looking for. So it's important that you verify. So as we say, do your own research. All of those tips and all of the call name are beneficial to establishing yourself as a descendant and organizing your family. So There are always more descendants to be found. There are always more information to be learned. So never stop researching. So with that being said, Julia is going to introduce a form that we can use to organize our families and our research. Julia?
Thank you, Shonda. All right, if you will bear with me just a little bit, I'll get this document up so you can see. It's very, very simple. And let me focus on getting it up. Things take a little longer in San Antonio. Okay, so what you see here is what we've used to gather our branch of the family together. And this is a Harris Ware Advocacy Team Declaration. And as you see, it's a very succinct declaration of what we believe, what we want, what our intentions are, and so forth as that branch of the family. And we've sought to gather as many as we could to get on board so that we can demand to be heard and get a seat at the table. The most important thing about this form, I didn't catch that. The most important thing about this form is its simplicity. This is a Google form, and really you must have a Google email and a Google account, but that's all. And then you can create this form in Google. So if you would, and the other thing that you need to know is that once you've had this statement, then this form actually populates itself. There are questions that you can create. The form prompts you. For example, we've asked our families for their email, their name, what are the names of their children under 18, and it asks again for the email address. And this particular one will populate this form with a number of responses. And if you look very closely, you can see here, this is not as current as it needs to be, but it tallies your responses for you. And it also collects the emails so that you have an automatic contact list from this document. And entering your hard address is optional. Okay, so again, you have a statement here that you can cut and paste into this Google form, and then you can create questions. You can make them short answer, multiple choice, whatever you want. And it populates itself and tells you how many people are responding and gives you a contact. So I'm going to stop sharing that for a minute. And I'm going to tell you that I have a link, Karen, if you'll help me. I'm going to type it into the chat. And it has a step-by-step description of how to create this form. And when I tell you it's 5 steps or less, it's easy. And if you're familiar with Google, then you know you can just go to the waffle area of your account. It'll drop down and you can get the forms there and create your form. So I'll go ahead and type that link in while the rest of the meeting goes on. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And as soon as I can, I will place that link in the live chat on YouTube so that everyone can have access to it. So now we're going to enter into the question and answer session. So if you have questions, please enter them into the live stream, the live chat on YouTube. Before I go on to the questions and answers, to all of our presenters, was there anything else anyone else needed to say that they didn't get a chance to say?
Yes.
Yes, go right ahead.
I just wanted to, I did not mention directly the benefits of having a DNA test, because sometimes there are people who don't have access to DNA to actually verify or validate their connection as a descendant. So while DNA testing is very important, we should also, along with DNA testing, bear records, visualize records, collect artifacts, as compelling supporting evidence. So while we're researching, yes, get DNA tested as many as possible, but also collect artifacts and documents and things like that to have supporting documentation as well. I forgot to mention that, Karen.
Not a problem, not a problem. Anybody else? Okay, well, we had a question in the live chat. Someone, Rachel Prouty, wanted to know who was Richard Cellini, and it just so happens Richard is in the live chat, so Richard is able to address that question. And I will check for any additional questions. And while I'm checking for the additional questions, I just wanted to clarify that earlier, I should have been more specific about direct payments. In the original document, it did talk about economic supports for descendants. Now, it was not spelled out that that would say direct payments, but it was in the original document, but that somehow just disappeared from the what became the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. And I'm not seeing any more questions just yet. If you have a question, please enter it into the chat. Okay, here we go from Patricia Bell. Is there any information of the ancestors' background of where the Jesuits obtained them? Any indication of the religion of region of Africa, for instance? Who wants to take that question?
If I could. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Curtis.
No, I said, who knows that answer to that? I don't know. I haven't come across anything.
I'll just say that in my research, I have learned that there are indications. There isn't, that to my knowledge, that I've found that there are indications that the Society of Jesus actually supported the transfer of slaves across the Atlantic, across the Pacific. So while that is not hardcore evidence that slaves came from Africa that they owned and sold, but there is evidence that they supported the slave trades across the country and worldwide. So it's kind of easy to, again, we don't have, I have not come across any hard evidence to say that. It's just indications in the research that I've done. It and share it with us.
Hi, so I did want to say, from a broader perspective, when we talk about where the Jesuits received their people from, it's important to remember that a lot of the enslaved population came from the founding fathers and mothers of Maryland. So you have the Carroll family, and Carroll actually brought in people directly from Africa. He made money off of the slave trade. That's how he made his money. He and his family actually not only bought ships and brought people here, but they actually insured some of those ships. So they were making money on both sides. Okay, so he also would make money from the travel. He sold people from those ships, and then he would buy people for himself. So the Jesuits got a lot of their land and their people from folks like the Carroll family, from the other allied families. They got a lot of land and a lot of people from Carroll, but they also would receive people via what's known as bequeaths. Okay, and so you have small portions of land that added up over time. When people would pass away, they would die, they would leave people and land in their wills to the Jesuits. And if you look at land records in Maryland, you will see papist lands, and that is where people have transferred their land that they own, in many cases, sometimes small number of acreage, sometimes hundreds of acreage, to the Jesuits after they pass away. A lot of these wills you can find at the Maryland State Archives. Some of them are in chattel records. We know that a lot of them are held by Georgetown University and they have not been digitized. And so I think to some of Chandra's excellent points about research is that we need to engage in a pressure campaign as descendants to have those wills and those documents that in some cases include the whole names of our ancestors released to us, as opposed to all of us having to travel to Maryland. We have folks on this call right now who are presenting to you who live all over the United States. So we need those documents.
Can I just also piggyback on that statement as well about obtaining slaves as well? We also know through research that there was corporations set up where they were actually purchasing property, not just human property, but also land. And so as with bequeath, they were also actively purchasing people and purchasing land throughout Maryland. And then as their organization grew throughout the US.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat for Julia. Is this for all GU 272 descendants or only for the Ware Harris descendant?
Well, the document that we presented is for the Ware Harris descendants, but what we're hoping is that each group of descendants will create one for their group, and then they can accumulate email addresses. They can inform their groups, as Curtis and others were saying. They can do the research, and then you can collect those folk who are interested in wanting us to come to the table and receive what we're due. So they would be individualized per family. So you could just go on Google and create your own form, is what I'm saying.
Thank you. Question from Yolanda Hawkins Rogers. Who is supposed to benefit from the racial healing? Who wants to take that one?
What is she referring to when she says racial healing? The recent agreement, is that what she's referring to?
From the Descendants Truth, I'm assuming from the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, because that's the 50% of the money is going toward that.
It appears the board members are the only ones benefiting at this point.
I just want to add something to that. What they seek to do is to try to dismantle racism, which is an impossible, lofty, and ironic goal in using us. And we all know that racism is not a disease of the African-American community, it's a disease of the white community. So what they want to do is raise money to cure white people of their racism, but use us as the fundraising tool. And I don't think that that's an appropriate use of those funds. I think they would be better used, say, closing the racial wealth gap experienced by descendants. So that's why it's important that we all need to organize. We need to get our voices heard. We need to be at that table, and we need to unwind what they've put together. And it's possible to do. It is possible to do.
Does anyone else want to chime in on that? Go ahead, Nagast.
Just to add to what's been said, what came out in the previous town hall and discussions with Mr. Stewart and other members of the organization is that it is completely possible for the Jesuits themselves to be able to receive funding because they are engaged in that racial healing work. It is also possible for other institutions who have engaged in slaveholding previously, as well as the oppression of Black people in America, to be able to receive that funding. So it is also important to remember that Georgetown University has received at least $2 million that we know of from nonprofit organizations in order to do a lot of this work. So the institutions that have engaged in slaveholding of our ancestors are making money off of participating in what they call racial healing and racial reconciliation. They have established academic chairs at their institutions, they're hiring people, and they're not spending any of their own money They're not spending any of their cash. They're doing this by what I call is like a feedback loop of all of these institutions. So you get money from the Kellogg Foundation, and now the Kellogg Foundation can now get money from the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, and the Mellon Foundation can do the same. All of these institutions have already worked with Georgetown and the Jesuits to have them establish this thing. The only people who are not being repaired, the only people are our ancestors and their descendants, who is us. So that is just something for folks to be thinking about.
Thank you. Shonda? Unmute yourself, Shonda.
No, I was just reacting to what Jess said. Yes, we're the only ones that, I was just reacting to her comment. Absolutely.
Okay. I just want to address a couple other questions in the chat in another response. Richard mentioned that some of the ancestors did come from Sierra Leone. That's addressing a question from earlier. And Andreas Wheeler wants to know if there will be a session to show new beginners how to read their JED match. And we can certainly do that. We can do it here on YouTube, actually. And Dawn Dan says she logged in late. Will this be available for replay? It absolutely is. It's available forever. As long as there's YouTube, it'll be here. Okay. Let's see. Let me scroll down. Let's see if we got a lot of comments. How do you allow your ancestors and slavers to be on the board and make a decision about anything? Well,
we didn't make that decision. It was not our decision. We were not in the room. That's why we're here today. If we had been in the room, it would have been a different outcome. Absolutely. And it wouldn't have a majority of priests on the board and people that were involved in the enslavement of Black people on the board. They are a majority. Institutions and individuals that were involved in enslavement are a majority.
And then,
can I add to something on that, Karen?
Sure, go right ahead.
This is related to something earlier, and I started to mention, but since we're on this foundation that's set up in the board and the way they're acting, and some of the partners, when we're talking about where in Africa our descendants came from, we all know one of the best kept records from times back then are records from banks. Now, if we have some banks who are also a part of this process and on this foundation, and for example, someone told me that one of the bank representatives, that bank bought a bank from the past who probably had the banks who had some of the collateral default obligations that funded a lot of the slave trades. But all of these transactions on slaves are kept at banks. And banks do have all their records digitized or stored, going way back. And so it's interesting that some of the players who could help solve some of this are together making decisions. And it also relates to some of the documents that maybe Georgetown may have in their possession, but if Georgetown doesn't have in their possession, these banks do. And no funding or effort is made towards capturing that information. So it's interesting that some of the concerns we have about the whole makeup and what people want to do in terms of the healing, if they would all sit down and with questions like this and address these questions and say, what's the best way to address that? We could probably get to a point where we would all benefit from it and answer a lot of the questions and concerns we have. So I had to just chime in on that.
Thank you, Curtis. The next question is, how many scholarships have been given? Are they full scholarships for any program? Who wants to take that one?
Well, since I'm the only Georgetown mother in this group, I have two children that attended Georgetown, one undergrad, one in graduate school. The undergrad, Georgetown is a need-blind university. So if you don't have the ability to pay the tuition or whatever gaps you have via family contribution, they will put together a package for you. The package will have, you know, a little bit of scholarship money, some grant money, and loans. My son received a package like anybody else that would have been going to that school. So he did not receive a full scholarship to go to that institution. He has student loans like everybody else, virtually everybody else who goes to college. My daughter at the graduate school level, when she was accepted, she was told that they do not give money to graduate students. That's their policy. So they were not going to assist her at all. But after I made known to them that I was going to make it known to the press that they were not going to give her anything, they simply cut her fees in half. So her program was $60,000. So she wound up paying $30,000. But no, they're not giving any full scholarships. Now they have a fund that they've started as a result of the student referendum that took place 2 years ago. And they said that they're going to begin handing that money out in the fall, but they haven't said how much per individual. They haven't said what the criteria is. They certainly don't let us know, because we don't know everybody that's in this group. We don't know how many people have applied for admittance to that school and what their status is, you know. So I'm just speaking as a Georgetown parent. No, my kids didn't get a descendant scholarship, you know, just come on down to Georgetown and everything's covered. No, that did not happen.
Anyone else want to address any more about that question? I will.
Can you talk a little bit about when the funds for the new foundation are scheduled to be released? Because people might be thinking about that as well, just so people don't think that that money is available.
Well, the funds for the foundation are totally separate from the referendum monies. And they said that they're not going to start handing out any money from the foundation until they get to the $1 billion mark. They say that it should take them 3 to 5 years to get to the $1 billion mark. You know, who knows? Who knows if they're ever going to get there? You know, I think with the way it's been exposed, I doubt that they get there. I doubt if they get to the first 100 million that the Georgetown and the Jesuits have pledged to help them raise. So, but no, that money, no, they're nowhere near handing out that money for anything, you know, but they're supposed to start handing out the $400,000 for people who are coming in the fall.
And Sandra, in addition to what Nages was just asking, that $400,000, so that's not going into this new Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation?
No, it's not going into the foundation.
Okay.
It's something entirely separate.
Okay. And so the Descendants, Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, I would say that if people have more questions about when money is going to be distributed, they should contact the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation.
If there is a way to contact them, they don't have an email address or anything. Do they have a physical, Karen, do they have a physical address where you could mail an inquiry?
Well, we can take a look at their website, but I was not aware of that just yet, other than their registered agent for when they filed their organizational documents. They do have social media accounts. But that is, you know, to get, since we're not on the board of that organization, I think that people should absolutely reach out to the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation to find out what their plans are. As far as I can tell, that information is not being shared on their social media, and it is not shared on their website, which is descendants.org.
There actually is a physical address. Now, whether or not it's their true physical address remains to be seen, but there is a physical address on their website. And I just wanted to let you all know that, because I'm a technical person, that when you do visit the website, there are tracer cookies that follow you to other aspects within their website. So that's just something to be aware of. Me being a technical person, a cookie follows you throughout the internet. So they have, and they publicly have stated that there are tracer cookies on their website. So that allows them to see what you're doing on their website. You do have the option to opt out, which is required, but that's just to let you know. But there is a physical address on the website. I don't know if it's real or not, but there is one on the website.
Do you know where would I find that, Shonda? Because I would definitely put that up there.
You know what? Let me put it in the chat because I'm actually about to
Okay.
copy it.
Okay, yeah,
Can
no, that's great. That's perfect. And then I'll copy and paste it into the YouTube chat. While that's going on, Ted Yorkshire says, why are we trusting any Jesuits to this day to do the right thing? There is zero truth in their history or present day actions. So I don't know, was that a rhetorical question, Ted, or did you want someone to address that? While we're waiting to hear back from Ted, Malcolm, go ahead.
Sorry,
Go
can I
ahead.
jump
Go
in?
ahead.
I just want to emphasize to all of the participants that we don't have anything to do with that foundation. And so you are asking questions, and you should, but you need to direct those questions to the foundation, because we only know what we know from reading about it, from doing press on the subject and things like that. So we will not really know the answers to these questions, but I encourage everyone to reach out to the foundation, to the Society of Jesus, to Georgetown University, to JP Morgan Chase, whomever, all the board members, if you have questions, because it's important. And this town hall really is to emphasize the fact that, kind of the shady circumstances that it was created, and how, we really need to, the majority of us, which is the majority of descendants, needs to really come together to do something about it.
Okay, thank you. That's a very, very good point. Our next question comes from Malcolm Butler. Do we have cousins who are lawyers who can provide legal counsel, or if this has occurred, is there a summary of those consultations? Who wants to take that?
We have cousins in every walk of life. I don't personally have not consulted with any descendants who are lawyers, but we have descendant lawyers here in this family. Right, Curtis?
Yeah, we do. And I mean, they're participating in terms of the input just as other family members. But, until you get to a legal issue or a legal stance, or you want to go to court or something, they're like legal advisors. That's all I can say with regards to that.
I think that you need to organize with your family groups or other descendant groups and stay connected, because obviously we want everyone to organize, and we want to do what would be in the best interest for the descendants who want to participate. So stay connected to your family groups or other descendant organizations, keep information flowing, and be an active part. If it comes to that, and if you have legal counsel and it comes to that decision, then that's would be a welcome addition to the group, when it gets to that point.
I just wanted to add that it will help you in your family groups if you have a central person or persons that kind of, I don't want to say in charge, but they're managing the email information. They're also talking to different people to be the ones with their ear, open to what's really happening. It's better if you have one or two people doing that and then disseminating that information. Of course, that doesn't mean that you're not reading and researching and doing your DNA and so forth. But if you have a central person in your family group, or persons, teams work too, that could be very helpful as well.
Okay. I think, Curtis, this will be a question for you. How would you get information from the banks if you can?
Well, if there was a bank that was involved and had the financial documents to a trade agreement that involved some slaves, then the parties who had an interest in the matter could go to the bank and request the documents. It's just that easily. So you have to go through some process like that. So it's obvious at some point, if whether it was Georgetown or whatever the entities who had the plantations, who entered into some type of agreement from those slaves, then the bank would have the documentation for that. Now that might be step one, because they may have gotten it, as someone said, from a private party in the US. As you know, slaves were traded sort of like commodity. And so then from that document, you could find out the other parties of the prior trades and things of that nature. And then you'd have to use those authorities who would have the authorities to release that information to give it to institutions. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not giving legal advice, but I'm just thinking about the legal steps that would have to be involved. And of course, a lawyer would have to, tell you what you would exactly need to do, but it's that type of process. It's sort of like a chain in command. And so you have to get acknowledgement from the parties who were involved to move forward to get that information.
Thank you. Next, Trill XD asks, did the priests know that they were involving themselves or aligning themselves with an organization that did not represent the majority of enslaved? Who wants to take that one?
I think that's the $1 million question. They were invited to this town hall. We have participated in different forums that they have hosted and asked that very question, as among others, to receive no answers. They refused to answer, so we don't know if they knew or if they didn't.
We know that they knew afterwards because there's a letter that's in the resources, and we put a link to the resources in the live chat. That letter, we told them that we have the documentation that proves that they were not dealing with the majority of descendants. So at this point in time, they absolutely know. And that is why we are seeking a dialogue with the Jesuits, because we have more people, more descendants on this chat right now than were members of the GU 272 Descendants Association at the time of the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding. Let's see, we have another question here. And I just missed, oh, here we go. Julia, are we able to visit Georgetown to see if our documents are actually in the repository?
I'd like to say that if you're not familiar with the slavery archives, I believe it was Jess who mentioned that the archives are updated and controlled by the Jesuits. There is a lot of information there already, but we know, some of us know that there is a lot more information that's not there, that's not made available. And that's one of our concerns. I'm sorry, Julia, it was Julia. That's one of our concerns, that we don't have complete access to the information that concerns our ancestors. So while there is available some information that can at least get you started, we demand access to all of the information to include financial information that Mr. Curtis is talking about, relationships with banks, JP Morgan, I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. We demand access to that, and that's one of our concerns. I hope that answered your question. I see that you've been asking that. I can't remember who it is, but yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Next, we have Jerome Spears. There have been many other U.S. examples of compensation going back years and even more currently, 9/11, for example. Can some form of compensation be developed and applied to us? Any views on how? Anybody can take that?
I think that's why we're here having this conversation, and my section specifically pointing to the absence of reparations in their conversation. Yeah, there's been many examples of reparations that have been given out. It's not, in fact, it's so in style that the U.S. government has, brought up the conversation as moving forward with it. So, it's a matter of them not wanting to provide reparations in the form of payments, period. That's the end of the story. That's what it comes down to. They found a group of descendants who insisted on that not being on the table, and they ran with it. Even though there were other descendants that insisted otherwise. And that's what it's all about. And so it really is up to you, the descendants, if you allow them to get away with it. Me, for one, I don't plan to do that, but I could use your help.
Anybody else want to address that?
And just to follow up on Rhonda's point, the Jesuits themselves upon emancipation.
I just wanted to point out, because I'm reading the chat also, and
Go ahead, Shonda.
oh, I just wanted to point out, because I'm reading the chat, Ted Yorkshire pretty much said it all for me. The answer is in their silence. That's it for me, Ted.
Yes, and I wanted to follow up to Rhonda's point and the discussion about reparations. In Maryland, the Jesuits, upon emancipation, enumerated the people that they still had on their plantations with the intent of receiving reparations. Let's be clear, the only people who did not receive reparations are the people who were enslaved in us. There were people throughout the Maryland, DC, Virginia region who received reparations. They didn't only receive it from the states, but many of them received it from other institutions. Some of them got payments for insurance because they lost their capital. This was business, so they were paid.
That's clear with them that it was the slaveholders who received reparations.
Yes,
They applied to
slaveholders.
the government, and they received X amount of dollars per slave that was emancipated. Be clear that it was the slaveholders that received it.
And let's be clear, they got it from the government, and
Right.
sometimes multiple governments, state and local. So they were paid. The holders received, the enslavers received reparations. They were paid.
Yes, and there is a compilation of this information, whereas shortly after emancipation, slaveholders were anxious to, write down every name and age of every slave that they had, so that they could get money from no longer having those slaves. And that is compiled, and it is available online.
And in some cases, the amount of information enumerated on those records is the most you can find on your ancestor. That's how, let's be clear, that's how bad they wanted to be paid. Okay, so I just, want to get serious about this. That's how bad they wanted to be paid. They had full scale descriptions of folks because they wanted to be paid.
Okay. Next, Yolanda Hawkins Rogers asks, so are our hands tied? Is there some definitive action as a group that can be taken? I kind of bring it back to Curtis as part of the presentation. Curtis, you want to?
Well, that's why this is the first step. The things we're asking you to do in terms of organizing yourselves and getting your families together and strategically thinking about how we want to address this matter. Different families may have different strategies and ideas. Hopefully, those of us who have been around this matter will continue working on this, and we can put things together and maybe come up with some approaches of trying to address this with the Jesuits and as well as the foundation people. We think the concerns ought to be concerns of everyone, all the parties, as a part of it, quite frankly. The reason for the negative press is because, things don't sound right. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm convinced, as a practical matter, when things are really that bad, and it gets so smelly and stuff that you're going to have to do something about it. That's all. And, things like that happen, but unless we organize ourselves and put our heads together, we'll never get to that point where we can effectively achieve the results that we think we want to have for our ancestors and descendants of our family.
Thank you. Ted Yorkshire also asked, are we working with the foundation at all, or are we an entity, entirely separate entity?
Erin, you could answer that when we're an entirely separate entity.
Oh no, look, I could answer a bunch of them, but I want to make sure I give you guys the opportunity.
Yeah, no, we are not working with the foundation.
Yes. Okay. And in terms of separate entity, we are a collection of families organizing ourselves to address this on behalf of our families. Okay. Let's see here. Are we able to form a class action lawsuit against this foundation?
Anything is possible, but yeah. I think we need to come together. We need to make sure that we all, our goals are similar. And if you are in a group of people who has that goal, then I think you should go for it. But yeah, I would say anything is possible.
But I would think that it would probably be better to direct our energies, if we go the legal route, that we direct them towards the Jesuits and Georgetown, not the foundation. Because the culprits here are the Jesuits primarily, and Georgetown in addition to. So that's where our energies, legal or otherwise, should be directed. It really doesn't serve our purpose to really try to engage with that foundation. We can give you what little information we have about the foundation. We can express to you our disappointment and our disagreement with the foundation, but really our argument is with, and our desire for repair must come from the Jesuit community.
Well said, well said. Coming from the chat room, Richard Cellini is addressed, says, Curtis, Mr. Curtis, we have documents that prove that the J.P. Morgan Chase accepted GU 272 ancestors as collateral on the loan. And so that information, I guess, is easy to get to. And I guess that goes back to the earlier question around how to get some of those documents. We meaning the Georgetown Memory Project. Let's see here. Malcolm Butler says you don't have to wait for a legal issue to come up. You can make it a legal issue. It is surprising that our cousins/lawyers have not been officially consulted, especially on potential legal aspects. So that wasn't necessarily a question. It was just a comment here in the chat. Go ahead.
I honestly, even though that was a statement, I think we should collectively, well, not collectively, I think we should say that, one, the point of this town hall was to get out the information, because there's a large population of descendants who don't have a clue. And as some of us have already said, that's not off the table, that anything is a possibility, but right now we have to organize. So if he, Mr. Butler, has organized, then go for it. But right now we are still in the organizing phase. So, I mean, because I see that comment, it keeps coming up in the chat also, Karen, and we should all just make note of it that we're still organizing. We never said we weren't going to sue, but we're still organizing.
Yes, and I wanted to, because not everybody, not all of the panelists are looking at the chat, and I wanted to make sure that you guys were able to hear some of the comments that are coming out of the chat in addition to the questions. And again, if you have a question, please use the question format. If I did not see your question, please repost it, and we will make sure your question gets answered. We have about 10 more minutes left, and we want to make sure that we answer all questions. And while we're waiting for more questions to come up in the chat among our speakers, are there any questions that came up for you as we've been during this town hall that you want to put on the table?
Yeah, I saw a couple questions regarding research, regarding artifacts. I've seen a lost who asked about, do some of the records actually dictate where families went and left? And then of course I saw another person chime in and said yes. It depends on, sure, it depends on what you're looking for, or who you're looking for. Like even Jess can attest, Jess can confirm that researching takes time. Researching is hard, but if you are determined and you know what you're looking for, it can be found. There are lots of resources that can help. Again, the Slavery Archives is a good starting point. Not all the information applicable to us as descendants is available there. So the world, the internet, the local resources, the federal resources is your oyster. Please, as you can see, I'm an enthusiast for research, so do what you can. So, and there are tons of us that can help. You know, what you may be looking for, I may not be looking for, but I may know the answer to that just because I've been researching. So I don't know who asked that question, but I hope that, I think it was Des Downs, I'm not sure, but reach out, we can help. So I just wanted to mention that.
No problem, no problem. Another question from earlier on before I put the question format out was, the GU272 Descendants.org is filed as a social club. Interesting. 501c7 fits under the social club. And I remember at the time when that came up, it was supposedly because it was a membership organization. That's why it was filed as a 501c7. Sandra, do you have anything more to add on that? That's what I remember.
Well, when I was still there, the paperwork hadn't been filed, remember?
Well, yeah.
Remember that conversation?
Yes.
Preston Castile had stopped proceeding with the paperwork until, you know, we could have a change of the guard, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, it was done as because it was a membership organization. That's what we were told by, that's how we were advised by the attorney that it had to be done. Okay, let me just go back.
There are still certain, you know, requirements that need to be met, like IRS requirements. You know, social club or not, if you're taking in money, people have the right to know what those funds are being used for. And so that's why those disclosures are to be made public. And so from what we understand from our research is that, you know, they only became incorporated in 2019, actually. So that first filing was due May of 2020, and it is not available with the IRS. And the second filing, which is due this month, is not available with the IRS either. So there are some deficiencies there, which, that probably points to, that organization anyway, how it began. I mean, you all have stated there were, fewer than what, 5, not even 5 official members of the organization. So, it's kind of embarrassing actually that the Jesuits would even enter into any kind of deal of this magnitude with that kind of organization. So, I would be interested in learning more personally. But again, I do feel like, my charge is with the Jesuits specifically, and that it is separate from whatever, kind of bogus deals that they made.
Another question is, are there plans to schedule these lives on a regular basis? I am grateful for the information, and I was about to sign on to the GU 272 Descendants membership until this conversation.
Well,
And
I think it is necessary. I think it is. And there are descendants organizations that are out there. And I responded to the live chat also, is that we are emphasizing organizing with your family units. But if you don't want to do that, or if you do, for whatever reason, you don't want to do that, there are descendants organizations, because after all, we all are family in this. So there are descendants organizations, organized or not. And there are Facebook groups that you can join. And there is a resource sheet that shows gives that information so that you know who are reputable and who are not. And so I would encourage you, when we say organize, not just with your families, but organize with other, like-minded individual, groups.
okay. All right. The next question is, and certainly we are happy to have more of these on a regular basis so that people could get their questions answered. And I also host a Thursday night genealogy Zoom call with descendants, so that we work on how we connect to this history and how we connect to each other. So we do a lot of conversations around genealogy and that sort of thing. If you go to the link in the chat with the resource page, it lists some social media, and Rhonda has also put her social media in the live stream chat as well. And all of the participants on the call tonight, if you want to invite people to reach out to you on social media, please do. Because there are, quite a few people in the chat who definitely want to see some kind of organizing happening. The next question is, who are those 50 members of the Descendants organization? Well, Gloria, what I could tell you is that during my time as the executive director, according to our bylaws, it was my position as executive director to approve membership. And at the time of the signing of the document, there were 48 people who had submitted applications, but because the application process was being revamped, I had not actually granted or submitted to the board for membership anyone. So they weren't really members. Those were people who had submitted applications to be members. And that was expressed to Father Kaseki, that they did not have members in accordance with that they did not have the majority of descendants organized into a GU 272 Descendants Association. It just didn't exist. And that was the Memorandum of Understanding was signed on September 20th, 2019. And so, of course, I can't give you names of people for privacy purposes, but I can assure you that that's all, that there were people who had applied. Are there any other questions? So we have about 2 minutes left. Any closing comments or statements, questions from our group of descendants?
I've been doing a lot of listening this evening because I'm still learning about all that has gone on. But I just want to say there is strength in numbers, family. And the best thing you could do at this time is get with your family groups and organize and connect. I just want to reiterate that. That's at the core. That's at the grassroots of this all. So that's the very best thing that you can do. There is strength in numbers and in having, and we will have our voices heard with the numbers that are coming out of this. And the more of us that do it, the more will be heard. So that's just my comment for the evening.
Anyone else?
I'll make two comments. One, with regards to this, we talk about why they did this 501c7, and for the association is 501c3. And it's really all about the money. I've been involved with some organizations, and when you're going to get a lot of money like that and you're going to invest it, so it's more for IRS purposes and reporting purposes. And when you know you're going to be investing money and things like that, I think it's more like that. So that in itself is not nefarious. Some of the interest in other things, those are other issues, but I just wanted to throw that out as information for everybody. But two, I wanted to say, Karen especially, but all of you, you have done such a wonderful job in terms of all your time and preparations. I'm so proud to have spent this time with y'all. And I want all the other people who are listening to know that these people have spent so much time. For every hour that you've heard tonight, there's probably been 8 hours spent or 80 hours spent having discussions and sharing material. And if we keep that information process and exchange going, I'm sure we're going to figure this out and how to get the attention of everyone to make this a better process.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I just want to thank all of you for, coming together to do this, to share information with all of our family that's out there. You can, and everyone that's in the chat and everyone who will view this after this, please leave comments in the comments section and join us on all of us on our social media to further engage with us. We let's see, Nages, is that something else you want me to post before we end? Okay. Again, thank you, everyone. And we will see you again real soon. Good night, everybody.
Good night.